The House made history today, impeaching a president of the United States for a second time, charging Donald Trump with incitement of insurrection a week to the day after rioters stormed the very building where today's vote was held following his speech.
And we know that the President of the United States incited this insurrection, this armed rebellion against our common country. He must go. He is a clear and present danger to the nation.
If we do not hold him accountable and remove him from power, a future attempt could very well be successful.
But unlike the last impeachment vote, which was an all-Democratic affair, this time 10 Republicans were on board as well, including the number 3 GOPer in the House, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, and Washington Congressman Dan Newhouse as well.
There is no excuse for President Trump's actions. The President took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Last week there was a domestic threat at the door of the Capitol, and he did nothing to stop it.
Several other Republicans privately told reporters they wanted to vote in favor, but feared for their lives if they took that step. For several members of Congress, today's historic vote also marked their first speech on the House floor, just 10 days into the job. Among them, Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Newton, Massachusetts.
A mob desecrated our Capitol, killed a police officer, and attempted to overthrow our government on the orders of the President of the United States. Immediate impeachment is our duty under a Constitution that compels us to defend against enemies, foreign and domestic. As a Marine officer, I defended our democracy from foreign enemies. As a member of Congress, I am solemnly resolved to defend it from domestic ones. With this vote, we strike a blow for moral leadership.
Congressman Auchincloss joins me now. Congressman, welcome. Thanks so much for being with me.
I appreciate you having me on, Jim.
With, at least as of the moment, with it unlikely that there'll be a vote to convict in the Senate, why was a vote to impeach the right one today, Congressman?
It's about moral leadership. This president incited insurrection, and he has capstoned 4 years of white supremacy and disregard for the rule of law with an actual violent attack on another branch of government. And if we fail to act, we set a precedent for future generations and for future leaders that the Constitution is not the supreme law of the land. Moral leadership starts with removing this president. It continues with protecting the integrity of our institutions. And finally, it concludes with returning to governance.
Do you worry that today's vote fuels even more anger from the people you were just describing, Congressman?
The incitement of anger has come from the top, and it has come from Republicans for the last 4 years. They are the ones who, as Representative Cheney said, summoned the mob and lit the flame. And they continue to do so with their baseless accusations of a stolen election. They are culminating these 4 years with what I think of as the big lie of a stolen election. It rhymes with the lost cause of the Reconstruction era, this conspiracy that somehow the rest of the country has conspired to steal what is rightfully theirs. And we must quash that, and we must not be intimidated by the mob that it incites.
I think it's much better for this country, even if people disagree with the outcome, that this was a bipartisan vote. 10 Republicans, as I said, joined the vast majority of Democrats. However, the vast majority of Republicans did not vote the way you did. Why?
I think the most important word from your recitation of Republicans' behavior in that opening was the word privately. Senator McConnell had said privately that he disagreed with Trump and thought the offenses were impeachable. Well, I'm tired of Republicans speaking privately about their disagreements with the president. For 4 years, they have been privately admonishing him and publicly praising him. Now is the time for them to have moral courage and to publicly separate themselves from him, because their words do matter. Their words do affect how their constituents view this election, how their constituents view the president, and how their constituents view these free and fair elections that we had. It's time for Republicans to be publicly in favor of country and Constitution.
Did you see the piece in the Detroit Times or read about the piece that Representative Meyer wrote in which he said, relates to what I said a minute ago, that he spoke to at least one Republican colleague who said he absolutely knew that the vote to challenge the electors was wrong, but he was going to vote to challenge them anyway for fear of violence being perpetrated against his family. What's your reaction to that?
With respect, I disagree with it. Nobody, of course, wants to see violence inflicted on any elected official or any American who is upholding their lawful duty. But this is a job that compels moral courage. And when you take an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, there's no asterisk for, well, unless the president tweets something mean about me, or unless there's a mob who disagrees with me. That is an oath that is solemn and that is above all else.
I want to play something for him. Mickey Sherrill's a New Jersey colleague of yours, a Democrat, also a veteran, as are you. She did a Facebook Live thing talking about some of her Republican colleagues. Here's what Congresswoman Sherrill had to say.
I also intend to see that those members of Congress who embedded him, those members of Congress who had groups coming through the Capitol that I saw on January 5th, a reconnaissance for the next day, I'm going to see that they're held accountable, and if necessary, ensure that they don't serve in Congress.
I want to talk about accountability of your colleagues. I mean, one, there are the 140, give or take, who voted to subvert the democratic outcome of the election. There are the people who Congresswoman Sherrill is alleging were conducting reconnaissance efforts with some of the rioters the day before. And I think you've probably heard this guy, Ali Alexander, who is one of the lead organizers of this insurrection, saying that there were 3 members of the Republican House, and he named all 3, including Mo Brooks, probably the most prominent of the 3, who worked with him to plan what they did on that day. What should happen to these colleagues of yours?
Well, I've already signed on to a letter censuring Mo Brooks and, if necessary, expelling him for his activities and incitement to political violence. And the touchstone here is the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which makes clear that those who take an oath to the Constitution and then work to incite political violence, to incite insurrection against the United States government, cannot then hold office. And if we see in an after-action review that members of Congress are guilty of violating the 3rd section of the 14th Amendment, they should be expelled.
Well, assuming, I'm not much of an historian, but very few of your colleagues have ever been expelled by their colleagues. Assuming it doesn't happen here, these people not only did the things that, again, Representative Sherrill and Ali Alexander said, but again, 140, give or take a few, voted to overturn the outcome of a democratic election. Why do you believe, if you do, that we won't see more of what we saw last Wednesday if it turns out that these Republicans continue to stand their ground?
Well, their attempt to subvert the election failed. And there is going to be an orderly transition of power. It's not going to be a peaceful transition of power, as unfortunately that has already failed. But there will be an orderly transition of power, and their attempt to subvert the election has not succeeded. And now we need to support President Biden in taking on this pandemic. We are faced with the worst natural disaster in a century, and we need to put the full institutional support of the federal government behind a plan to vaccinate 1 million people a day for the first 100 days, to open up the K-12 public schools, and to compel mask wearing until we get control of this pandemic.
I want to speak about your having COVID-19 being your number one priority as a newly elected congressman with a hell of a first 10 days, I should say. But before I do, President-elect Biden, every other sentence is about unity and bringing the people together. I want to play for you 3 of your colleagues who speak about the need for unity. And by the way, all 3 of them were people who voted to overturn the results of the election. Here they are.
Congress must be the glue that starts unifying everyone.
We should tone down the political rhetoric. We should work together to solve the problems that face our nation.
We must unite once again as Americans. I understand for some this call for unity may ring hollow. But times like these are when we must remember who we are as Americans and what we as a nation stand for.
The final of those 3 was Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leaders of your House. You're shaking your head. What's your reaction to their call for unity, Congressman?
There cannot be unity without justice, and there cannot be justice without accountability. Unity rings hollow for me. The minority leader is right, because it is the yelps of a party that for the last 4 years has been doing nothing but fomenting division. And now they're tucking tail and calling for unity. Well, of course, the ultimate goal is for us to unify as a country and to take on our great challenges. But we cannot unify with white supremacists who stormed the Capitol and killed a police officer and threatened our very citadel of democracy. There needs to be justice, and for that, there needs to be accountability.
I want to return before we leave to your COVID agenda. Obviously, nearly 400,000 people have died in this country. I think one can say in great part because of the, as I've called it, the homicidal behavior of the President of the United States. What are the first 2 or 3 things, quickly if you can, that Congress has to do to begin to right this ship?
Support in all ways necessary the plan to vaccinate 100 million Americans in 100 days, and then ensure that we have a robust testing strategy, not just in K-12 public schools, but in nursing homes and early education and all elements of the public square, because testing is going to be our bridge to a summertime in which we start to get towards herd immunity.
And is a relief package in the offing in short order, an additional relief package in your estimation, as Joe Biden promised?
The president-elect and House and Senate leadership are signaling that a new relief package is going to be brought for debate, and I'm certainly going to be engaged in that, making sure that small businesses, working families, and state and local governments have the support that they need to get through this.
Congressman Auchincloss, thank you very much for your time, and I hope your remaining days are different from your first 10. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.